CD, you were talking specific to the recommendation that was placed before you as addressed at a particular meeting, calling for your signature of the document. Just to close that off, can I ask you to look at page 39 of the bundle? And that is the signature page of that document. The first signature on the left-hand side, on top, is by a Ms. Paladi Kaba. And the title of this particular individual is Commodity Manager, Group Strategic Sourcing. Ms. Kaba had signed the document, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
One question, the very position of Commodity Manager, Group Strategic Sourcing, is it an administrative role? Or how would you describe the role of that particular position to the process?
Chair, I think my understanding of that role, and having read the PPM as well, that role is a sub-process within the contract management role, which entails a whole lot of things, including administrative, but it also includes things like when the contract is actually getting to an end, you actually prepare a memo to request for an extension, which means that you will have to also understand the content of that particular tender. So it goes a little bit beyond the administrative role of just writing minutes and putting things together, but it is my understanding that it actually has the contract management angle to it, and to be able to also just help with the processing of tenders and their validity at any one point in time.
Thank you. Can I then take you back to page 11 of the bundle?
Before you do so, you spoke before lunch about the memo that you took to Mr. Gama, where you, as I understand what you said, where you put your views rather comprehensively, or more comprehensively than the comments you made on the last page of the memo ending at page 39. And you said that memo you can't find a copy thereof anymore. Is there anything I should know about the content of that memo other than the points you articulated at the bottom of page 39? Is there anything you want to say as to that's important in terms of the contents thereof?
Chair, yes, the memo aims to give the detail of the risks, and my understanding of the risks, and my take that they are not as material, but also some of them are actually irrelevant. Now, some of the risks that were raised, Chair, and maybe for your noting as well, I think is one, just overall, the risks were mostly pertaining to the project scope or the
and
technical
operational matters, I think you all said earlier.
Yes, yes, Chair. And but it also included some administrative things like if Transnet, out of preference and choice, cancels this tender, what will Transnet be liable for in terms of this contract? Now, it's a question that you ask everyone, I suppose, in terms of, for one reason or the other, if out of convenience we want to cancel this, and that was highlighted as a risk, and I was saying it cannot be a risk to be applied. It's a scenario planning of some sort, where you're saying if this happened, what is not Gijima saying, oh, we want 400 and whatever million. So it's such kinds. The other risk, I think it was pertaining to just how Gijima wanted to transition and how they found the data center that Gijima was going to use. They found the Rex empty, and they didn't think that it's as operational. And my point is that it's not out of practice. You can't stock up your data center and buy switches and routers and all the processing powers and storage devices if you don't have a client. So what you do, once the client is secured, you actually order. And yes, you will have a lead period of that. And when we met with Gijima, when I was given the opportunity to actually clarify the whole position in terms of the data center, they actually explained they came with their partners. They had already even pre-ordered the equipment. So I think my memo, if I recall clearly, I was trying to give the detail of all that to say we cannot therefore apply this as risks.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you. Thank you. And just to give me maybe an even clearer picture of what your view was, out of 100, what would you more or less have given Gijima and what would you have given T-Systems, more or less in terms of your own assessment?
I think, Chair...
How far apart were they, in your view, taking into account risks that were taken into account by other people that you thought should not have been taken into account?
Yeah. I think, for me, Chair, if I look at how the evaluation has happened, the kind of things they looked at, the differentiator for me was going to be price, because with outsourced contracts, you really have a big margin to play with. Because how they work, if you employ me as a database administrator, I can actually service 10 customers. So the economies of scale benefit is quite massive. So I wasn't surprised that they actually slashed off the price by 500 or whatever it is that they slashed it with.
Yes.
So for me, that was the differentiator to say who is coming in cost effectively for me. Because technically, they were neck on neck, probably.
Okay. So, but you say because of the reduction of their price,
Yes.
the difference between them and T-Systems became quite big.
It became quite big because of that BAFU stage,
Yes.
where they were actually given an opportunity to give the best and final offer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. At paragraph 27 on page 11 of your statement, you inform that you were provided with an anonymous letter from your colleague, your then colleague, Ms. Disebo Mopuli. Can you please explain the circumstances under which this anonymous letter was shared with you?
So, Chair, now the process towards the end of this evaluation and adjudication of this tender is well underway. The memos that are presented, I have my own misgivings in terms of this memo. I can pick up the discomfort from people inside the meeting that they're not actually speaking out. It's like it's my only meeting here. And in that whole time when these things happen, then there is this anonymous letter that gets given to the group CCRO, Chief Compliance Risk Officer.
Just to correct you, it's the Chief Corporate and Regulatory Officer.
Or Chief Corporate and Regulatory Officer. Yes. So who was sitting with me on the same exco table of Mr. Gama.
This is now Ms.
Disebo Mwepudi on page 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
The statement says Chief Risk Officer, but you say that's not correct?
Apologies, Chair. It's actually in the letter which we will turn to shortly. That was the description of the position.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is what's in the statement you say may not be correct, that description.
Let me rather just
You are not sure.
check.
What's your recollection, Ms. Mosu?
I think it's CCRO. So that CCRO, Chair, I know I'm certain
Must
of
have.
it, but I don't know what it, I thought it says Chief Compliance and Risk Officer.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay.
And Ms. Mwepudi was not the one who is manning what we used to call a hotline, what do they call it, where people would register their complaints anonymously.
Yes,
Yeah,
she
so
was not
that
that person. Yeah.
She was just the head of of compliance and risk, and I think she was known for acting quickly and dealing with things the right way and so on. And I think that is why this faceless group actually wrote this letter to her.
Because they would have perceived her as a possible stumbling block, in the sense that once at a certain stage she might say, no, there's something wrong here.
Yes, they had perceived her as someone who's frank and straight,
Yeah.
and who would actually deal with something that they raise. Yeah. So she received.
And it was directed to her.
It was
at her.
it was given
Yeah.
to her.
Okay.
Yeah.
In that instance, can I then ask you to turn to page 67 of the bundle?
One second, Uzmak. Speak to or send a message to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Do you recognize this document as the anonymous letter, Ms. Musidi?
Yes, Chair, I do.
Chair, due to the gravity of some of the allegations stated in this letter, and in particular to the events that unfold, there are certain aspects that I will read into the record.
Sorry?
Due to the seriousness of allegations contained in this anonymous letter, and how it is to be considered in view of the events that unfold, there are certain portions of this letter that I will read out.
Well, let the witness read them. If she might wish to highlight certain aspects that she won't read out, and then read out those that are important.
No problem, Chair. Ms. Musidi, this letter is the letter that's dated 5 October 2016. Can I ask you to read, and unfortunately the paragraphs are not numbered, but the fourth paragraph, starting with "we were happy," down to the third last paragraph with "this letter from the evaluation team." Can I ask you to read that into the record, please?
Thanks, Chair. We were happy with the open and transparent manner in which the various stages of the tender evaluation process up to stage 5, which is a BAFO, were undertaken and followed in line with the tender. After the technical evaluation as per the defined process, we conducted a due diligence on both T-Systems and Gijima, where both companies satisfied the tender requirements. Thereafter, both parties were requested to price BAFO as greenfields in order to level the playing field as per the tender requirement. However, post-BAFO, we were surprised that the evaluation team leaders raised technical issues about bidder Gijima and engaged in a new process not defined in the tender nor in our Transnet processes. This was a huge surprise as Gijima came in almost 230 million rand cheaper than T-Systems, yet we were questioning how they could deliver at their tender price. This new process included a mail or a letter being sent to bidder Gijima to now respond to the so-called identified risks and respond by mitigating these risks, as well as to new terminologies not part of the tender document, namely current mode of operation and future mode of operation. This letter from the evaluation team leaders raised our concern that the process post-BAFO was now a new one.
Can I then ask you to please read the last paragraph on this page?
These new conditions are not only new, but do not make any sense. How can a new bidder ever submit a bid price for an FMO, which is final mode of operation, without having had the opportunity to manage what is required by both the tender and draft MSA, Master Services Agreement. This is not only bizarre, but a deliberate ploy to bring T-Systems through a back door to win a contract they are losing on merit.
If you can then turn the page. The first 4 short paragraphs on top. Please read that into the record if you may.
To us, a group of more than 12 persons, the interactions and lobbying post-BAFO by the evaluation team leaders indicated that whilst on merit alone, Bida Gijima are the just winners. The new process undertaken, which included voting, was a clear ploy to go against the tender evaluation process and find ways to ensure that the current incumbent succeeds, no matter that they are over 230 million rand more expensive. The voting after BAFO in particular was found concerning by many of us, and as we were spoken to before, we were called to the urgent voting meeting and bulldozed to vote. Out of fear of losing our jobs, we voted in favor as per lead McDonald, who claimed the bosses want the current incumbent to succeed. Many of us have silently viewed the new process pushed down our throats as unlawful and an attempt to rig the results. If the intention was to... Is it fine?
In fact, yes, if you could then go down to the paragraph which is third from the bottom, beginning with "We are amazed."
We are amazed at the flouting of the tender process, where we prejudice a local company that scored high on technical, BBEE, and financial as the tender criteria. This is what we know as the only criteria that Transnet uses in evaluating tenders on the 90/10 principle. But for this tender, every rule in the book is being ignored or changed in order to arrive at a different decision.
I then ask you to turn the page to page 69 and read the second paragraph into the record, please.
We are also aware that legal was not happy with this new process to eliminate deserving local company. Legal was also concerned about the use of the so-called future mode of operation, as these fly in the face of fairness.
If you could then go 3 paragraphs down to "We do not want to see," and read that and the following 2 paragraphs into the record, please.
We do not want to see negative news media articles about tender irregularities being printed about this tender, when all we tried to do, what is right and expected of us, is now post-BAFO flouted with impunity in the name of the bosses. This kind of behavior will ensure that we have a case to answer to, and we do not want to be a party to such disregard of the procurement rules. Transnet's governance and PFMA as Bida Gijima may approach the courts.
And then if I could take you down to the paragraph which begins with the question that's glaring then, and kindly read the 2 paragraphs.
The question that is glaring then is who stands to benefit here? Transnet will definitely be the loser here from the media scrutiny and failing our transformation agenda, where a local company is on top on merit. The issue of state capture is topical amongst state-owned entities, and we do not want to add fuel to the fire where a service provider who lost is retained at all costs. We are concerned why our team leaders find nothing wrong in bringing Transnet into disrepute and want to divert from the tender award process knowingly.
And finally, the last paragraph on this page, please.
As we were told, it's an instruction from the top. Who amongst our senior bosses are driving the manipulation of the tender evaluation process and why? That's the question.
Thank you. Were you aware of this letter before it was provided to you by Ms. Disebo Mpuli?
No, Chair, the first time I came across this letter was when I was given by Ms. Mwepudi as the CCRO.
What did you make of this letter when you were provided a copy of it?
I think the first thing, Chair, because of my discomfort right through the process, it did actually start making me more alert to scrutinize and to understand, and I started feeling like perhaps there are some points which are written in a white ink because you can't read them anywhere that I should be aware of. But if anything, it made me confident that my sense that the risks as applied were posed and were not as material. It started making a bit of sense and giving me a little bit of confidence, because initially I was really in a spin because I wasn't sure whether I was seeing things or whether my newness was playing games with my mind.
Reference is made to the word bosses in this letter. In your understanding, who might bosses have been referring to?
So, Chair, bosses, in my own interpretation, I was also a boss. And I think it was confusing because I didn't want anything of anybody. I just wanted to be objective. However, even those who were members of the GLT, which was called the Group Leadership Team, and you can read into that as the Group Exco of Transnet, they would be bosses as well. But the subcommittees of the board as well would be bosses because, and of course the board of Transnet would be bosses as well. So the whole executive layer would be branded bosses, in my view.
So it would appear at the end of that letter that it came from employees of Transnet, if what they wrote there is true.
It would appear, Chair, that it came from the employees of Transnet. In particular, it came from some of the cross-functional evaluation team,
Yes.
who were actually kind of forced to vote and to recommend certain things because the bosses told them to. So the bosses wouldn't have told them to someone who was external. It had to be someone from Transnet.
And when reading the letter and knowing the discussion at the meeting at which you were raising your reservations about the approving the recommendation, do you think that some of the people who wrote the letter may have been in that meeting, or not necessarily?
Chair,
I hear they talk about meetings where they were forced to vote, but it could be other meetings, of course.
Chair, I don't think they would have been
They
in my
would not
meeting.
have been in that meeting. They must
No.
be talking about other meetings.
Other meetings as well.
Okay, okay.
Thank you. Around this time, were you invited by Mr. Siyabonga Gama to a meeting after hours at all?
Yes, Chair, I was invited by Mr. Gama to a meeting in Tintswalo Hotel.
What hotel?
Tintswalo Hotel, it is in
Yes.
Sunning Hill.
And when in relation to your becoming aware of this letter was that?
No, Chair, it's not even related
It is
to...
not related?
No,
Okay,
no.
okay.
Please explain the circumstances under which you were invited to this meeting.
So, Chair, whilst the whole...
I'm sorry. If that question is taking you to a meeting with Mr. Gama that's unrelated to this letter,
Yes.
I would want first to know what happened? What did you do after becoming aware of this letter? And do you know whether any steps were taken by anybody, including yourself, to act on its contents?
Okay. So, Chair, in Transnet there is a hotline. I don't know why I've forgotten the name of the hotline, but the hotline where people can anonymously register any
Report issues.
suspicious corruption or
Yeah.
anything that they would like to without risking to be victimized. And this letter was not sent to that hotline.
Yes.
This letter was given to one of the executives, which is Ms. Mwepudi. So Ms. Mwepudi, looking at it, it's a tender that pertains to my business unit. She gives it to me to share, and I say to her, so what is going to happen? So she responded to the anonymous email to say, I'm available to discuss further. But she also gave it to the internal audit section of Transnet so that they can start the forensics. As an executive, we were allowed to actually institute a forensic process as and when you deemed it was necessary. Of course, you would let the group chief executive know that you are going to do that. So she actually undertook that process and made sure that internal audit together with the forensic auditors will actually investigate this letter further. But nothing came out of it because, as I learned later, that forensic process was stopped for one reason or the other. And so she never knew the outcome of the letter, and so I never knew the outcome of the letter too.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm hoping that somewhere somebody will tell me more about who stopped that investigation and why. So
I was
either there is an existing witness who will deal with that, or if not, steps should be taken to try and get clarification there.
noted, Chair.
Thank you.
Going back to the invite to the meeting by Mr. Siyabonga Gama at Tinswala Hotel, please describe the circumstances, the time of day, and the reasons why this particular meeting, why you were invited to this particular meeting.
So, Chair, around this time before Mr. Gama called me to a meeting, we were out in Esalen Park, which is a campus of Transnet. And the tensions about the tender were playing out because he was aware that as executives were not agreeing. Remember, Chair, I am the business owner running IT. Mr. Gary Peter is the business head heading up procurement. So we were coming with different recommendations for one reason or the other that I have explained earlier. And I was quite convinced and I was quite resolute that my view is correct until someone shows me my blind spot, which I was not having at the time. And so we finished. It was our exco. We finished, and I think on or around 7:30 before 8 in the evening, Mr. Gama called me and said, "Makanu, can we just have a meeting? I'm in Tinswalo because I live in that area, Chair." And I went to the meeting. It was dark already, and I went to Tinswalo, and
This is after work.
this is after work,
Yeah, okay.
which is not uncommon, Chair. Just,
Yes, yes. Around about what time? if you
Around
are
about
able to-
between 7:30 and 8.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in the evening. So I also called Ms. Mwepudi just to make her aware that, look, I'm going to a meeting with Mr. Gama. I think there are some issues that he would like to actually understand from me. I don't know what. So when I got to Tinswalo, I got there, and usually I see the drivers and I'll know that I'm at the right place, but I couldn't find anybody, and I was looking, and at the end, I found Mr. Gama sitting alone, you know, and the chairs there are quite long, so you won't actually be visible from the door. So I thought the whole room was empty, so I'm looking and I'm not finding him, but finally I see him and he's sitting there and he's waiting for me. But maybe because he's a short man, I think his head was just up to here to the chair. And so good evening, sir. And he then said, look, Makan, I just want to understand that, one, you are convinced that your decision about T-Systems is the right one. Two, remember, procurement is dangerous. It's a very dangerous process. If, for example, you scuttle a party, which by now people would have shared maybe 5 million, 5 million, 5 million, and you come and you scuttle that party, you would have endangered your life. So are you sure, are you certain, have you done your due diligence in terms of interrogating this process? Are you comfortable in terms of where you are going to land? Because I would like to make you sensitive as a new person to the dangers of procurement as well. And I said to him, yes, I can actually deliberate and talk to every point that I've raised. So I'm quite comfortable, and you can also be comfortable that I've done a due process. That meeting went on, and Chair, when I looked back, we spent about 2.5 hours in that meeting. But the main thing really was to see if I was quite certain about it. But I felt like it went round and round. I wasn't sure if I was missing a point. But the main points were those that, are you certain, and are you comfortable? Will this stand any test? And I said, yes, it can.
What was your immediate reaction when he asked you these questions?
Chair, a lot of things came to my mind. That, one, is it acceptable for us to be objective? Because I think we have a role, we have a responsibility as a leadership to ensure equity, to apply our mind, to read everything, and to actually make the right decision, because I think bad things happen when wrong decisions are made. So I began to start doubting, to say, is he not confident in what I'm saying? Or are there other things that I have to be aware of that I'm not aware of? So it did rattle me to start saying, what is it that I'm missing? Because he's my boss, so is he seeing things that I'm not seeing? It did challenge my confidence, but also it challenged the environment that I was working in. Because if he's saying it's dangerous, is it dangerous? You know, is it about, if you don't award this if you don't award to Mr. A and you award to Mr. B, is there any danger that you have to, is it not just seen as in the line of duty, not to actually? So my mind went into a whirlwind, but at the end of the day, I think my decision still stood and said, look, I can't see it any other way.
By that time, did you know whether he had received and read the memo that you had given to his business manager?
No, Chair, I didn't know. Actually,
and from
I've
the
never
discussion, you didn't pick it up?
No. But because I've always explained to him that these risks are misplaced and they are mostly immaterial, I think he could have picked it up from those conversations, but I wouldn't know whether he actually saw the memo that I wrote.
Were you rattled by the references to procurement is dangerous, and if you scupper a tender that certain people may have already divided the proceeds among themselves, that could be dangerous? Is that the talk that rattled you, or is it something else?
I think, Chair, the talk overall rattled me. One, if you say that people by now would have shared 5 million, 5 million, and 5 million, and you will be gate crashing such a party, who would that be? I was startled by, will it be people that I work with? Will it be somebody from outside? Is it why we had to have drivers and bodyguards, you start thinking about, is this safe? Is this the environment I want to be in? Because I'm not a procurement person. I'm an IT operator and I want to see the impact. But now I'm going to endanger my work and my life with this procurement process, which really is just a means to my end. So I think I was rattled by those statements and what they could mean to me.
Yes. Well, now you have just clarified something.
Yeah.
You said you were rattled by those statements.
Yes.
Earlier on, you were said by the whole talk, and I was wondering whether you
Which
meant the
part
whole
of it?
discussion. But do you mean those particular statements? Though that's what rattled you.
Those particular statements, yes, Chair.
Yes. Now, did he engage you on this occasion on the soundness or otherwise of the reasons you gave for not agreeing that these were genuine risks?
Chair, on that particular evening, we didn't go into the detail of all the risks or any
But
risks.
did you go into some to look?
We didn't even go into some. He was just saying, are you sure? Can I look you in the eye? Are you certain? Is this right? That's what he was saying. And are you aware of the danger of going against the tide, sort of?
Before this meeting, had you had occasion to discuss with him your reasons for taking a different view? Had he had the benefit of hearing what you had to say, even if he might not have read the memo that you sent to him?
Yes, Chair. So, as a manager of mine, I kept him appraised and abreast of developments and discussions. And I would share and I would say, look, this is looking very strange. I mean, it's not making sense because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is where we are. But procurement will actually do the submission, I suppose. So, yes, I did bring him into that discussion so that he knows exactly how the developments were happening.
Did he ever disagree with your reasoning on those occasions? Did he ever say, but no, you are not right, or I don't see your point, or anything like that?
No, not that I can recall, Chair.
He didn't engage you in that way?
In that fashion,
Yes.
no. He just mostly tested my conviction of my stand.
Now, that memo that you signed, you said under duress, that memo, it was still, from you, it was meant to go to him and Mr. Peter, is that right?
Yes, Chair. So,
For them to also consider, and if they agreed to sign.
yes, Chair.
Did they ultimately sign it?
Not that particular one.
Not that particular one?
No, Chair.
Okay, so at the time when you met with him at the hotel, as far as you know, you knew they had not signed, the two of them,
I wasn't even aware that they had not signed
at that time?
at that time.
Oh, okay. But
It was
it
my
became-
understanding that they would have seen the memo and
Yes.
he would have had my objection.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
perhaps
You, were you still expecting some engagement from him on your reservations at
I
that
think-
time, or you can't remember?
I think, Chair, I always expected his engagement to actually decide on the right route if there were two routes. I expected him to look at the two options and see which one is the right option.
Did you expect that since you were the, what did you call, the business owner?
Yes, yes.
Since you were the business owner, did you expect that if he, since you expressed reservations before finally deciding which way to go, he would engage you?
Yes, I expected him to engage me, Chair,
Yeah.
as the owner of the business. I also expected procurement to engage me further.
Yes, yes.
Because I was the client in
Yes,
that instance. They
yes.
had to please me.
And neither engaged you?
Procurement, we engaged and we never really agreed
Yes.
until we met with Kichima.
Yes,
Um,
okay.
And with him, we continuously just engaged.
Yes. I find the focus of the discussion in your meeting with him a little strange. He was your boss. You reported to him, isn't it?
Yes, Chair.
And approving or not approving that recommendation that was placed before you was part of your job.
Yes, Chair.
And one would expect that as your boss, he expected you to perform that function honestly and truly and not be influenced by any fear of anything. That's what I would expect. Did you expect the same?
I expected the same, Chair.
And but that discussion, the questions he asked you, or the question about dangerous, this being dangerous and so on, it could be dangerous if people have already divided among themselves who will get how many millions. Doesn't appear to me to be the kind of question that should come from somebody who expects the subordinate to just do the right thing.
I would agree with that, Chair. That's why I found it a little bit uncomfortable.
Yes, yes. And from what you have testified, he didn't engage you in that meeting on the basis of the merits or demerits of your points.
No, Chair.
Or your point of view.
No, Chair. He just engaged me overall in terms of the outcome of my assessment.
Yes, yes. And there had never been any serious engagement between the two of you on your reservations up to that point?
Not, Chair. Not really. Especially in that meeting, it was just about the dangers of procurement.
So for more or less 2 hours, because I think you said that meeting took about 2 hours, for more or less 2 hours, he engaged you on largely the dangers of procurement.
Yes, Chair, and how people would behave and, what it would mean if you do this and if you do that, and are you sure? And yes, that's why I say it was one of the weirdest meetings because it took so long when I checked now, but all we discussed really was two things. Are you sure? And do you know the dangers of procurement if you scuttle a party? So just in summary, for those 2 hours, that is what we did.
Did you subsequently have an opportunity to analyze this meeting and the discussion and try and see what you could make of it? Or not really?
Chair, I tried to analyze it.
Yes.
I went over the meeting over and over the discussions over and over again.
Yes.
To see if maybe I was being a little bit blonde and I was not understanding certain things. And I couldn't lay my hands on something.
What would be your answer if somebody asked you, on your analysis, what was the purpose of that meeting?
If somebody asked me, I would give two views. One, either that he was actually testing as a new executive to Transnet whether I would do due process and whether I can stand, even when it's difficult, and stand up to any questioning or interrogation. What was not actually comfortable for me was to have it in a hotel, because as my boss, we can have it anywhere. We can have it in the office, but perhaps it was after hours, right? So, and maybe he wanted to put it to bed that day because I knew we had an EXCO meeting that day. So I think for me, that was the first part, to say, I wish we could discuss this more in the office, perhaps even in EXCO, to say, can you just share with us your conviction? These risks, we're all responsible for this risk. Can you just take us through? And can we just engage with your views? So I would have expected that. So the call at the hotel was not something that I was used to. I enjoy family life and I enjoy going home. So when you take me out of my family, it's not one of the most pleasant things that I enjoy. And then the second thing, I think, for me, when I look at it, I'm thinking, perhaps there's so much mistrust right through Transnet. Is it possible that I'm also getting some 5 million rand from someone? Was he testing whether, are you in this party with someone else? And if you are, can we see if we can deal with you? So those were the two things I was like, is that something that he was testing? So those were the two, and I never got an answer, and I never really asked him. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Ms. Mosidi, how did that meeting end?
That meeting? No, it ended like that, Chair, where I think I had clarified to him and how he had also aired his views, and I wasn't sure whether I had convinced him to the end, but where I had given my views and he has given me his cautionary notes, and I actually got into my car and went home.
Part of what is exercising my mind about the meeting and the questions he put to you and the fact that he was not engaging you on the merits of your views on the tender is if he was asking you, as I understand he was, whether you were not scared that you could be harmed because of the decision or the stand you took. That's part of what I'm putting to the discussion, but you can tell me whether
Yes, Chair.
you think it's a correct understanding.
Yes, Chair.
If that's part of what he was saying to you, what was he going to say if you said, actually, I didn't think of it. Now that you say it, I'm scared. Now let's start with whether you think my understanding of part of what you are saying to you is correct.
Perhaps, Chair, he would have said, look, if I had said, look, I didn't really apply my mind, I'm not quite confident, and perhaps my conviction will not stand the test of interrogation, perhaps he would have advised me to say, I think the middle route for you, which is safe, is this. Perhaps he would have been executive over me, and perhaps he would have been a manager and said, look, for your safety and for this process to conclude in a manner that is going to be acceptable by all, this is the route we need to take. Perhaps he was going to give that counsel for my safety.
But what if your position was, I think it's correct, but I am scared. I've got kids or whatever the position, I'm scared. But there is a certain element of speculation.
Yeah.
But it's an endeavor to try and understand what the purpose of the meeting was.
Yes, Chair.
Why were you asked those questions in circumstances where you had made your position quite clear, even though you did sign, you had recorded your reservations, but in addition you had written something quite detailed.
Yes, Chair.
To indicate your situation.
Chair, I think it's a question we'll never be able to answer 100%. We'll always speculate about what it could have been. Because, quite frankly, nothing ever scared me. Perhaps now, looking back, but then I was still excited. I was still hot and wanting to do things correctly. And so perhaps at that time I had no fear at all. But after he mentioned it, I started looking around myself. Because I never Yeah, I never actually even thought I needed a bodyguard or something. I'm one of the executives who didn't have a driver or a bodyguard out of choice. Of course, I never really wanted to. So, but after that, I started thinking, is this something that I need to consider? So yes, Chair, will never be able to answer it 100% fully.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Mosidi, on paragraph 30 to 32, which is pages 11 and 12, you talk about the process that was engaged upon to mitigate the risks with Gajima. Because following the next, at that particular stage, it was during December of 2016 that you were then called to the office of Mr. Siyabonga Gama. Can you please just give details of the reason for the invite and the process that subsequently followed?
So, in December 2016, Chair, Mr. Gama called me and Mr. Edward Thomas to his office, where he was trying to get us to a resolution of this whole tender process. And
Mr. Thomas' position again was what? It's mentioned earlier, but
Mr. Thomas is GSC, Group Supply Chain Officer.
was he under Mr. Peter?
He was under Mr. Peter.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
but he was the group-wide chief officer of Transnet.
Okay.
So Mr. Gama called us to his office and advised that me as a business owner should be given an opportunity, Chair, to interrogate Gijima and their risks and to understand in the audience of procurement as well how they planned to mitigate their risks. And he actually made sure that that whole process happens within the procurement process so that I just don't stand up alone to go and discuss with Gijima. So he asked Mr. Edward to compile the questions, to write the communication to Gijima, to invite them to that session with those questions. So he actually asked Mr. Edward Thomas to facilitate that process. And the meeting, Chair, was finally called for the 23rd of January 2017.
And who was all present at that meeting?
So in that meeting, which we held in the Pretoria offices of Transnet Engineering, from Transnet side, it was myself as the business owner. There was Mr. Mutsweni, who was in charge of governance. There was Mr. Maluleka, who was the category manager, group strategic sourcing. And then there was Mr. Edward Thomas himself. That was the Transnet team. And from Gijima, I think it was the whole executive team that came through. I just remember that Mr. Gumete, the chairman, was there, and his CEO was there, and his COO was there, and a whole lot of other executives were there. But also, there was IBM, who was a partner to Gijima in this tender. And yes, maybe other people that I wasn't aware of, but it was quite a sizable group of about maybe 15 to 18 people from Gijima.
And what was the outcome of this meeting?
So this meeting, because we had sent questions up front to Gijima, they then took us right through the questions and they were addressing each and every question.
Yes, let me hear the discussion at the meeting before the resolution.
Okay. So Chair, there were questions that we had sent to Gijima. Most of them were pertaining to those risk questions that were raised. Like, for example, there was one on current mode of operation and final mode of operation, which initially I did explain to Chair that when you are talking greenfields, I wasn't convinced that it must come into play at that stage because you want to finalize this tender as greenfields. And there were issues about their capacity and their skill. There were issues about how they managed to actually shave off 500 million without putting Transnet at risk. And Gijima took us through all the plans that they had. For example, they spoke about how, after understanding better the requirements of Transnet, they were able to shave off from, I think they said, help desk in terms of the costs, because help desk, yes, it has its own costs, but you can also automate it as much as you can. So I suppose they were able to do some optimization in that area. But they also explained, because there was a big issue about how the data center was not operational and how the lead time to order the equipment was going to pose as risk to Transnet. And they also explained that they have now brought their partner IBM, who must actually give assurance that they have now pre-ordered the devices and the equipment that will be required to actually operationalize the Transnet environment and allow for the transition of Transnet from T-Systems into Gijima. So they were very detailed in terms of how they were going to deal with each and every risk that we raised. And every executive from Gijima who was there, they had something that they were actually responding to, and I think they had structured it according to the towers that I spoke about earlier, like relationship management, how were they going to do it, how were they going to manage projects, and so on. So the meeting from their side was quite detailed in terms of how they were responding to that. And subsequent to the discussions as well, Chair, they wrote that full response, and I think it's somewhere in this many files where they responded to each and every risk in writing as well. And in that meeting, they also requested to record the meeting themselves. And I remember Mr. Gumete, even before we answered, he said, okay, there it is, that's my recording device. You know, and he was murmuring something like, I know that these things get lost or something like that. He actually made me laugh. But he did actually record the meeting himself as well. So, yes, there were questions. Yes, we did ask a few questions to understand their position in their presentation. But at the end of it all, once we had excused them, once they had addressed all the questions, they were excused, and we all agreed that I think all the questions and all the risks have been addressed. The taste of this pudding will be in the eating at the end.
That agreement was that all the risk issues of concern, the risks had been satisfactorily addressed.
Yes, Chair.
Okay, and the people from Transnet who were with you, did they challenge any of the things any explanations being given by Gijima?
Very minimal. I can't even remember what it was.
Nothing serious?
Nothing serious, really.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And so it is your evidence that that meeting then concluded with all risks being mitigated?
Yes, Chair, that was my understanding, and that's how we concluded the meeting.
Thank you.
Well, is it mitigated or they were explained
They were
satisfactorily?
They were explained satisfactorily.
Because the two don't mean the same.
To the satisfaction of Transnet team.
Okay.
On page 13 of your statement, you now address the two conflicting recommendations.
I see that one of the persons who attended that meeting, if I understand correctly, was Mr. Maluleke.
Yes, Chair, the one with Gijima.
The meeting with Gijima.
Yes, Chair.
Between Transnet and Gijima.
Yes, Chair.
Is that the same Mr. Maluleke who had said to you, are you going to go against yourself?
Yes, Chair, that's the same Mr. Maluleke.
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
It was around February 2017 that an issue arose in relation to two conflicting recommendations. What recommendations are you specifically referring to?
So, Chair, the issue of the recommendation, it always had this dual views, one recommending T-Systems and one recommending Gijima. So after we had met with Gijima, we then put together a recommendation for their award, which I was comfortable with. And Chair, if you look in one of the annexures, there is a memo that has been written, and the difference, there are two memos. The difference with the second memo is that I then included that process where we met with Gijima, because for me it was an official process that actually contributed to us understanding the risks and how they will be mitigated. But there was then another memo which Mr. Peter had, which was recommending T-Systems. So we were having these two memos. It was the due date for one memo to go to
Mr. Gama.
To go to Mr. Gama for his approval so that he can submit to the BADC. And I remember we were in Esselen Park, we were just about to start the EXCO meeting, and Mr. Gama said, you will give me one, you as executives will have to sort it out, and you'll give me one memo that I must actually go with. So you and Mr. Peter go and sort yourself out. And I was explaining to Mr. Peter to say, this is who I am, this is the work that we've done, this is, and I say we will actually go and recommend Gijima because of these reasons. And I think at the end, Chair, he did agree, although I always felt like, because the memos were largely drafted by the procurement team, the contents were leaning more towards elevating risks and actually creating that little eroding the confidence of what we were saying. But at the end, the recommendation was clear, and we ended up agreeing on the one memo, which was to recommend Gijima.
Yes.
So just to unpack that a little, there were then two conflicting recommendations, and conflicting to the extent of which company was being recommended as the preferred bidder. Is that right?
Yes.
So the one memorandum was authored by whom?
So the one memorandum was authored by myself.
And you recommended
I was
which company?
recommending Gijima.
And the other memorandum was authored by whom?
It was authored by Mr. Gary Peter for his signature, recommending T-Systems.
And by the direction of Mr. Gama, after the deliberations between yourself and Mr. Peter, the one memo that was then sent on was recommending Gijima.
The memo was recommending Gijima, the final memo.
Can I ask you to turn to page 76? And in particular, page 86. This memorandum is unsigned, and at paragraph 48 it talks to a recommendation to the GCE to approve the award of business to T-Systems. Whose memo would this have been?
This would have been my memo, Chair. No, this would have been Mr. Gary Peter's memo, Chair.
Thank you. Now, if you turn to page 76, the memo, however, is prepared from Gary Peter, yourself, and Edward Thomas. And it's addressed to Mr. Siyabonga Gama. Are we to understand that notwithstanding from whom this memo was sent, this was in fact your memorandum?
Chair, this memorandum, where T-Systems was recommended, couldn't have been my memo.
Yes. Well, is it not that they prepared it, or they included your name in the hope that they would persuade you, and that and that maybe they were going to take your name out if you were not persuaded? Because you talked about 2 memos, so obviously if there are 2 memos, either they will all go, or there might still be a process of discussion. You don't
Chair,
know.
Yeah, I don't know, because this memo probably came and I wouldn't have agreed to sign this particular
Yes.
memo.
Yes.
So, but just the way it's written, perhaps yes, if I had signed it, then it would be correct. That is from the 3 of us.
Yes.
But can I voice over and say, the way that memo is written, one would have expected it then just to come from Mr. Gary Peter, because as the person that procurement is reporting into, we would have all have signed here, and he would have just said, given what I got from my procurement officer, I am writing this to you. It is inconsistent for my name to be appearing in that heading of from. I doubt if all the memos are written like that. I think they should actually come from Mr. Peter himself.
Can I?
Bottom line is that you're saying
This is not.
you didn't give approval for your name to be included in that memo,
Yes, Chair, I didn't give approval, and that's why my signature is not on
and
that
you were
memo.
not party to it.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Can I ask you then to turn to page 88, which appears to be the other memorandum from Mr. Gary Peter to Mr. Siyabonga Gama. And while holding that page, if I could ask you to turn to page 108. And at paragraph 83, paragraph 83 on page 108, it records the recommendation that the group chief executive recommends the award of contract to Gajima Holdings to the Acquisitions and Disposals Committee for recommendation to the Transnet Board, and an ancillary recommendation. Whose memorandum would this have been?
This would have been my memorandum, Chair.
And similarly, at the start of the memorandum, it has been prepared by Mr. Gary Peter, and your name not reflecting in this.
Oh, it says from.
Yes.
There may be a distinction between from him and prepared by.
Apologies.
Prepared by might be compiled by, and then somebody else might then adopt it as his or her own. So page 88 says it's from him, that is Mr. Gary Peter, but the witness is saying that it was her memorandum, by which I take it you say you had compiled it.
Yes, Chair,
prepared it,
that would go with the recommendation that I was going with.
Yes, but you simply needed to reflect that it was from him, Mr. Peter, because it had to come from him.
From the
Yeah.
procurement head.
Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Then can I ask you to turn to page 110 of the same bundle, at which a memo appears,
Did you say 102?
110.
110.
It's the next annexure, annexure 8. This memorandum is from Mr. Gary Peter to Mr. Siyabonga Gama, and whilst holding your finger at that particular page, if you turn to page 129, at paragraph 83, there appears the recommendation that the Group Chief Executive, A, recommends the award of contract to Gajima Holdings to the Acquisitions and Disposal Committee for recommendation to the Transnet Board of Directors for approval. And B, recommend that the Acquisitions and Disposals Committee recommends to the Board to grant authority to the GCE to sign the letters of intent, the letters of regret, and all other relevant documentation, in summary of the last part of that paragraph. Is that your signature, which in fact appears on the on the right-hand side in the middle?
Yes, Chair, it's my signature.
And is this in fact the joint memorandum that was prepared between you and Mr. Peter?
Yes, Chair, it is.
And then just for clarity, if you turn one page before, at page 128.
Well, before that, I see that although you signed, but you didn't cross out not recommended. Was that oversight?
It was an oversight, Chair.
You meant to recommend?
I meant to recommend.
Yes, okay.
And apologies for my oversight too.
Sorry, Chair.
At page 128, just for clarity of record, is it correct that at paragraph 79, the final tendered pricing for the recommended bidder, Gajima, over a period of 5 years is 1,338,114,324 rand and 4 cents?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. And that the estimated savings over a period of 5 years on the contract, based on the current 5-year contract spend of 2.5 billion, is 1,161,885,675.96, which is equivalent to a monthly saving of approximately 20 million.
Yes, Chair, for the time that I've been there, that is what it is. I don't know if it changed subsequent to my departure.
Now that the recommendation was signed, and there was one recommendation, this was then the recommendation that that was to be tendered at the meeting of the Acquisitions and Disposal Committee.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
We are now, sorry, yeah.
Now,
Sorry.
I was going to say, Chair, then the next step was to actually now table it at the BADC, the Board's Acquisition and Disposal Committee.
Yes.
Paragraph 14.
Maybe this might be the time to take a comfort break. We don't always have a break after lunch, but we'll have just 5 minutes. We'll resume at past.
No problem. Thank
We
you,
are
Chair.
Chair.
Ms. Musidi, from paragraphs 35 until 43, apologies, until 40, you by and large deal with the meeting that took place, the Acquisitions and Disposal Council meeting, committee meeting, sorry. Can I ask you to turn to page 131 of the bundle? Do you recognize this document?
Yes, Chair, I do.
What is it, please?
This is the copy of the minutes of the meeting where this tender was discussed by the Acquisition and Disposals Committee,
In particular,
What was discussed, I'm sorry?
where the
The recommendation.
yes, where the data services tender recommendation
Yeah.
were discussed.
Yes.
At the,
So this would be this would have been the meeting where that single recommendation that Mr. Gama was asking for
Was presented.
was tabled or would have been tabled.
yes, Chair.
Yeah, okay.
more accurately stated, it is an excerpt of the relevant portions of the meeting, minutes of the meeting, specific to your agenda item.
Yes, Chair, it is.
On page 131, there appears to be 3 categories of attendance. Just to highlight some of the names in attendance, those who were marked as present was Mr. S.D. Shane, being the chairperson, Mr. S.I. Gama, a member, Group Chief Executive, Ms. Elsie Mabaso, a member, Mr. Z.A. Nagdi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and also marked as a member. In attendance was Mr. G.J. Peter, Chief Financial Officer, Mr. M. Sigonyela, the General Manager.
I'm sorry, was that not inaccurate? That wasn't his position, isn't it, Mr. Peter? He was not Chief Financial Officer, was he? Was he not something, supply chain management or procurement?
No, Chair, he was the CFO, but procurement was reporting into him finally.
The correct title was Chief Financial Officer.
Yes, the Group Chief Financial Officer.
And Mr. Singh, or was this not Mr. Singh's time?
No, it was not Mr. Singh's time. When I was in Transnet, Mr. Singh was not there.
Mr. M. Sigonyela, General Manager, Office of the Group Chief Executive, Mr. N. Selinga, Chief Legal Counsel, Mr. E. Thomas, Chief Supply Chain Officer, and others. And then you are marked specifically in partial attendance, the third one under paragraph 1.3, as Ms. M.A. Musidi, Group Chief Information Officer. It is noted at paragraph 1.4.2 that the chairperson noted that the GCE was delayed from a prior meeting, and the chairperson requested that the meeting be adjourned on arrival of the GCE for a brief meeting between the Group Chief Executive, Chief Financial Officer, and the chairperson. Can you please set the scene for this chairperson as to how the agenda item had been introduced with your invite to attend the meeting on the day?
Thank you. So, Chair, the ADC is attended by the official members who are marked as present on top. And depending on what the agenda is looking like and the items that need to be discussed on the day, you will have the list which is in 1.3. So that list will say partial attendance. So what basically happens, then you attend for the part that you are actually responsible for, so that you can actually speak to the submission as presented. And that is why, Chair, you will see my name there, but it won't mean that we're all in that meeting at the same time. After my item, then I would leave and the next person will actually continue. So on this particular day, so what then happens, you would be knowing that on that day your matter is going to serve in front of the ADC. So either you wait outside mostly for you to be called into the meeting. And so the meeting was in and we were waiting outside. And then when my item came, I think they adjourned, they had a body break, and they stopped, and we were waiting for them to actually come and start the meeting again.
And how long was that break?
That break was quite long. I think, if I am correct, it would have been about 50 minutes to an hour where they took that break. And whilst before the meeting started, a lot of people came back and we sat down, like Mr. Nahdi was sitting down and waiting, and I think the rest of the people were not there. So as we were waiting for that length of time, everything was settled, but we're just waiting, of course, for the official members of the subcommittee. And then in walked the remainder of the members, which was Mr. Shane, Mr. Gama, and Miss Mabaso, after that long wait.
The ones who went away, was it those three?
Yes, so when it break, everybody went out.
Oh,
and,
the meeting was adjourned temporarily?
Yeah, it was adjourned temporarily. And then everybody came back.
Within like 15 minutes?
Yeah, within 5 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We made ourselves comfortable in the boardroom, and then we were waiting for the real members to come and continue with the meeting.
Okay.
And,
but you say Mr. Nahdi was waiting with you?
Yeah, but Mr. Nahdi was waiting with us.
So it was only the
top three names that were not.
Yes, okay.
Yes, they were not there.
Okay.
And then, of course, after an hour they came in, and Mr. Shane, who's the chairperson of that committee, then commenced with the proceedings of my agenda item. And I just remember, Chair, that when he opened the meeting, he actually explained that we're now getting into the most difficult discussion of this meeting for today, meaning the agenda item that I was going to talk to. Yes.
At some stage, I thought you were saying something like, while you were waiting, I thought there was something, and I might have interrupted you. Maybe something happened while you were waiting.
No, Chair, I think
really.
I was just trying to make clear that some of the names that are under partial attendance, I wouldn't have seen on the day.
Okay.
They wouldn't have seen me as well.
Yes,
So it might look incorrect, but it is correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
no, that's fine. So the chairperson said we are now going to the most difficult issue.
Yes, Chair.
Okay.
And that's when he was actually opening the discussions for the data services tender.
Were you then afforded an opportunity to make representations to the committee?
Chair, yes, I was allowed to give some representation to that committee.
Did anyone else give representations to the committee in
It was
relation
me.
to the recommendation?
Chair, the main respondent to the submission and the voiceover was myself and Mr. Edward Thomas.
If I can then ask you to turn to page 137 of the bundle. This is a transcript of the particular meeting on that day. And Chair, the certificates of veracity are all included in the annexure as well. In particular, can I ask you to turn to page 154, please? And I'd like you to read something into the record, which was in response to a query that was raised to you by Ms. Mabaso.
Before that, can we just deal with this? I take it that when you are given a chance to make a presentation or to talk at this meeting, you talked in line, your presentation was in line with the memo that was recommending Gijima. Is that right?
Yes, Chair, it was.
Yes. And largely what you said was what was contained in the memo? Or
Yes,
not?
Chair.
Yes, largely.
Largely it was,
Yes.
yeah.
And did Mr. Thomas, when he got a chance, also go along the same line?
Mr. Thomas went along the same line, punctuating the procurement processes a lot.
Yes,
And that's
okay.
how we ended up.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a follow-up to that, did Mr. Peter give any comments when making the recommendation?
My recollection say he didn't give any comment in that meeting. I could be wrong, Chair, let me.
But I know that Ms. September wants to take you to documents, but in terms of your recollection, was there anybody else, except yourself and Mr. Thomas, who you recall also spoke to this item or questioned you on your presentation or questioned Mr. Thomas or spoke in support of what the two of you had said?
Yes, Chair. In terms of my recollection, Mr. Thomas spoke at length in terms of the procurement processes. I spoke at length in terms of the operational requirements of the tender. And I seem to recall that Mr. Gama tried to explain a point I was making, just briefly. But I also remember that Mr. Silinga, who was the head of legal, explained the risk portion a little bit in support of what we were saying, in support of what the memo was saying.
Yes.
So those are the four people that I remember from. I can't remember Mr. Peter commenting on any of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
But on the whole, as far as you recall, everyone who spoke, or rather, no one who spoke against the recommendation, as far as you can recall.
So as far as I can recall, Chair, is that everyone spoke in line with the recommendation, but everyone amplified what they thought it should be amplified.
Yes, yes.
Yes, and I felt, and now this is really becoming a little bit subject, because at that time I was beginning to feel maybe the way we have written the memos, we want to amplify and scare the board
Yes.
that there were risks, although at the end we still come back and say we recommend Gijima.
Yes.
But I had a sense that the deliberations of procurement, for example, they were leaning more onto the risks, which we kept on saying, but they have been mitigated. Why do you have to then raise them to the board? So there was that sense in that meeting.
Yes.
But everyone spoke in line with the submission as made.
Okay, thank you.
When you mean everyone, who exactly do you mean?
So anyone who spoke, be it Mr. Thomas, be
Every one of the four or so that you
Mr.
mentioned.
Silinga, myself, and Mr. Gama.
Thank you. So if I can then take you to page 154. And let me ask you, was your position on advancing that the recommendation to Gijima was the right one, tested at that meeting?
I think it was tested in very simple terms.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that question. Just repeat it, please.
The question is whether or not the witnesses' position to advance the recommendation of Gijima was tested at all at the committee meeting. Yes.
Okay.
So Chair just said that it was tested in a very simple way, according to me. Ms. Mabaso asked me and tested me and said, if it was your money, would you put your life on this, on the recommendation as it stands?
And what was Mr. Mabaso's position again? Legal counsel?
No, Ms. Mabaso
Ms.
was
Mabaso.
the chairman of the main board. She was the
Oh.
chairman of Transnet.
Oh, but was she present at that meeting?
Yes, Chair. She's a member of this meeting.
Oh, okay. So she sought to get your answer on whether the position, the recommendation was what you would go with, even if it was your own money.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's how my
Yes.
my views were tested.
And your answer was?
I answered and I explained that I believe in the procurement processes of Transnet. They are there for a reason. They take away subjectivity, and therefore, based on those processes and their recommendation, I will actually bet my bottom dollar.
Okay.
And just to amplify the very answer that you've given, at page 154, paragraph, line 7, you then assert what your position is. Can I ask you to just read your section into the record?
Where I start with Chair.
Yes, please.
Chair, I would go, you see, I believe in our procurement processes, and our procurement processes gave me the confidence that Gijima can actually do what they can, because even if you look at the evaluation process, the difference between the two has been just a fraction. It has been 0.21 and 0.25. So they were almost neck on neck. There is no big variance between the two, so I have got my comfort in that the procurement processes were actually dated enough. And then if you look at the partners that I have in Gijima, if you look at IBM and you look at Vodacom, you look at Vodacom on the internet, Chair, they lead in terms of UIT technologies. They lead in terms of their own mainframes. So you have the comfort that this particular consortium will actually reinforce the black company as in Gijima company. So I will put my head on the block for Gijima.
And with the progression of the meeting, is it correct that Mr. Stanley Shane then made an address to the meeting?
Yes, he did. He made a long address.
It's at this point in time that I request permission to play the audio with us following in the transcript of the particular address that Mr. Stanley Shane presents at the meeting.
Yes, go ahead.
If I could ask you to turn to page 158, should you wish to follow, it begins at the bottom. Aligned with
Yes.
chairperson.
From line?
Sorry?
From line?
Line 18.
18.
1-8.
Okay, thank you. At page 158.
At page 158, the particular paragraph is titled Chairperson, and it starts with, "Can I comment?"
Yeah,
Question mark.
okay.
Can I request that the audio recording be played, please?
Everybody a bit of background. We're sitting with a committee. I include the GCE and the GCFO as board members, because in addition to their day jobs, they're also board members in our day. We wear fiduciary risk. We wear...
Sorry. Is that as clear as it can be? Is that the clearest it can be?
I'm going to give everybody a bit of background. We're sitting with a committee.
Is that a yes or what?
And the GCFO as board members.
Stop
In
quickly.
addition to their
Stop.
day jobs, they're also board members in our day.
My question is whether that's the clearest that we can have. Is the answer yes or is the answer no?
The answer is yes.
This is the clearest.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Start afresh.
I'm going to give everybody a bit of background. We're sitting with a committee. I include the GCE and the GCFO as board members, because in addition to their day jobs, they're also board members in our day. We wear fiduciary risk. We wear publicity risk. The chair and I specifically, and Mr. Peter may also become famous, Mr. Magby and Mr. Garma have escaped thus far, but we've been tarred with certain brushes in the press. We represent a board of directors diminished at the moment. We have one member who's sick. We have one member that was promoted to the DG position, to DPE, and we have a very risk-averse board. Unfortunately, guys, when it hits the newspaper that the ADC and its chair, or the chair of the company, its GCE, authorized a transaction, it's our names that appear in the press. We have been unable as an organization to protect our board from fame with our fortune. I sit at a table with people in my community, they think that I'm a crook. And the decision that was recommended by the executive is very nice, but we the guys who wear the risk. We wear the risk. In the end, we are the guys that are going to wind up with the repercussions of a disaster. And I was going to use a more vociferous word, which I won't. And with no disrespect, we are led down a path where we're going to wind up in litigation. Mr. Selinga, who's a busy guy, is going to be more busy. Because we're going to get sued by Gijima, or we're going to get sued by T-Systems. That's where we're at. That's what you guys are saying to us. And that's going to be the outcome. I want to go back a step. T-Systems business, which supplies us with our IT services, was a creation of the great Maria Ramos, of a business called Arivia.com. Mr. Peter will correct me if I'm wrong. Arivia.com was our internal IT department, merged together with Eskom's IT department. They've been there for 7 years cumulatively. They are the disingenuous, dishonest, thieving outsource partner that is incumbent versus the dishonest, disingenuous, thieving outsource partner which we can switch to, being Gijima. And I'm not special about this. You can throw Anderson Consulting now, what they call themselves these days? Accenture. You can throw Main Consulting, McKinsey, any of these consultants scum. You can throw them all into the pot. And this is recorded, so I know where it's going to go. Because at least when it gets printed in the newspaper this time, they're going to have our version of it. Now, we are, to answer the GC's question, not a risk-averse board. We are a scarred board. Every decision that we have made, we have worn the repercussions of issue. If and when this memo gets to the Sunday Times, as the last memo did, and they pull up the bubbles that are on this page here, and they say, look, Shane, ably assisted by the chair lady, Mr. Nagdi, and the CEO, they chose the bubbles that were here instead of the bubbles that were here. We're only interested in risk. I couldn't care about the cost. I'll give you an interesting thing. If it cost an extra R1 billion a year over 5 years, I couldn't care. I'll tell you why. Do you know what our turnover is in this organisation? Do you know what the number is for the year? Estimated about 65 billion rand. Over 5 years, we're going to assume, just extrapolate that by 5. My maths is not good, but 5 6s are 300, 5 5s are 25, 550, 600. Give me a number. Over 600 billion, guys. For us to be saving, to be debating, to be spending time on saving 200 million rand over 5 years on a company that will over that period turn over 600 billion. That doesn't matter. It's what I always say here. Bring me things that are important. The other day they schlepped in here a contract, some property deal for 15 million rand or 20 million rand because it was more than a 10-year contract. Guys, we've got to focus on the numbers and we've got to focus on the risk. We cannot afford to be famous again. We've got these mongrels, I say. They're a 7-year mongrel. They've been here forever. These oaks know them, you know them. You're relatively new to the environment. It's a risk-free. It's not a riskless. It's a risk-free option. They can't shut our mainframes down. They can't lose our data. They can't confuse our people. They can't switch off the electricity. They can't shut down the as you correctly point out, the one mainframe that we've got. Am I right? They manage our mainframe. They manage our memory. They are our memory. Well, I missed something. They're more or less correct. Data and all of the data that is stored. So I'm very loath, even though this may be the right solution from a commercial perspective, I'm loath for us to wind up in litigation with T-Systems. That is my motivation. I couldn't care, I hate them all. The fact that even Maria was stupid enough to do it, no disrespect to anybody who might have been involved in the process. The fact that we don't have our control of our own IT infrastructure, in my opinion, my humble opinion, is stupid. But it's too late. It is what it is. That is where we are. They have got us by these. They have. That's the fact. To go and swap to Gijima, or anybody else, in my opinion, would be tantamount to suicide. That's my perspective on it. That's the newspaper article that I'd rather have, with no disrespect to Gijima, who are not alien to suing their customers. I'll say that again slowly. They're not alien to suing their customers. Okay? I'm happier with the risk of getting sued by Gijima, who didn't get a contract, than us getting rid of the incumbent that we helped to create. I think it's suicidal. That's point number one. We can get into some of the details, because I'm in business. It's what I do primarily for a living. I'm not an IT expert. I'm not any. When somebody drops their price by 500 large, it's because somebody told them something. No other reason.
True.
Now, I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but if you'd like to do a forensic investigation into it, I think that you'll find that I may be right. Okay? I know that there were accusations that senior management were predisposed to the allocation or the retention, and I'm going to come to what my perception of this tender was in a second, of T-Systems. And I'll tell you this, that if I was a senior executive in this organisation, I would be predisposed towards keeping the incumbent, because I've got very big challenges here in terms of keeping my 65 billion on track, keeping my EBITDA in place, keeping my covenants in place with my bondholders, keeping the minister happy. The last thing that I want to do, guys, with due respect, is change my mainframe supplier and my data supplier and my IT supplier. The last thing that I would want to do. I'll tell you what my understanding of this thing was. My understanding at the time of putting this thing out to tender was that we wanted to keep T-Systems honest. That was actually the motivation. Now, I'm saying it can be quoted, but I'm not an expert and I'm not an executive, so you might tell me that I'm talking rubbish. We put this thing out to make sure that we weren't paying T-Systems 2.5 billion when we should be paying them 1.5 billion.
Yeah.
The result of this process is we're paying them 1 billion less over the period of the thing, which again, to reiterate, I couldn't care about. I could only care about the risk of can you imagine the headline? Transnet, because guys, understand one thing. We just put 182 locomotives into commission. The only locomotives they wrote about in the newspaper were 2 locomotives that have got vibrations that don't work. The other 180 locomotives. The fact is, if we go and change our mainframe and somebody sends an email from their personal email address because the Transnet emails have crashed. Can you imagine that email, guys? Can you imagine for all of us? The risk doesn't add up to me, and that's really what I don't know T-Systems. I wouldn't know T-Systems. I wouldn't bump in the street, other than the Gijima's documented case against the technology CETA. I don't know Gijima. Couldn't care about Gijima. Couldn't care about any of these people. But from a risk point of view, this thing is suicidal, and we take into consideration that from a legal point of view, no disrespect to legal, no disrespect to risk. What they said to us is this, if you read these opinions, they said, guys...
Interrupted. How long more, how much more will it still take? Okay. I've lost where they are, but okay, if it's 1 page, that's fine. You may continue.
We're happy with the risk of changing, we're happy with the risk of not changing. We're happy with the legal implications of changing, we're happy with the legal implications of not changing. That's how I read it. You want vanilla ice cream, you want chocolate ice cream, we couldn't care. Either way, you're good to go. You're probably not going to get food poisoning from either of them. And we concede that. We're saying as a board that's been embattled, because the chair managed to get into that preposterous report.
I'm famous.
I managed to get into the newspaper on a number of occasions, including relating to one ADC submission which somebody sitting at this very table, different people at the time, must have leaked. Somebody must have leaked it somewhere. So I'm not confident, Makana, that we can deliver on a smooth transition. Our contract management in this place, excuse my French, is cuck. It's cuck. It's terrible. I accuse you all of it. You're all useless at it. Because the contract may be good, Mr. Saliga's done his job, beautiful. The person managing the contract hasn't been good until now. You may be the new good manager of contract management. You may be, but I can't take that risk. I can't take that risk on so many levels. On behalf of this committee, my recommendation. Now, in the end, we're going to have a voucher, and we're going to either recommend with Gajima or T-Systems, and we then take that recommendation to the board. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Do you have any comments to the address that was made by Mr. Shane to the meeting, and in particular directed at you?
Chair, I think, firstly, in that meeting, I just felt that the executive input, the executive due diligence process to ensure that we lend the right service provider was just not taken into cognizance at all. The whole screaming and shouting of Mr. Shane just didn't land well with me, and I know with other managers as well. It came across as very derogatory and condescending. I think it just sort of mummed everyone to say, well, perhaps it doesn't matter what we could have done. I know that at some point when Mr. Shane was talking about how they never meant to actually get rid of T-Systems and how they were just doing the exercise to test the market and to keep them honest. I remember I actually asked in that meeting to say, I wish we had been told that. Then it would have been an easier process to actually test and say to T-Systems, can you actually slash your prices? We've tested the market, just slash it by R1 billion, we're good to go, instead of actually getting into this whole involved process that we did. So, Chair, I think, and he spoke to me about, yeah, you may be a new manager, but it has all been cuck in terms of how the contract management was done. And I think for me, just overall, I just felt the board didn't take into cognizance any work that we did. That's one. Two, and I just felt like they didn't take us seriously in terms of how seriously we take our work. So it didn't matter. And he spoke a lot about risk. And I always say as an executive, I'm also carrying risk. It cannot be that it's only about directors. It's no longer like that. If you're an executive, you have a fiduciary duty to satisfy all the time, and you carry the same risk as well. So for me, I think after that long talk, I just realized that I think we have said what we can say. It's really up to the board to make that decision.
Did any of the reasons provided by Mr. Shane constitute objective criteria as contemplated in the manual?
I didn't, Chair, just for the record, I didn't pick up any objective criteria or any predetermined criteria that perhaps we could have missed. So it just, I didn't find any place for his comments.
And so what was the outcome on the recommendation finally made by the committee to the board?
So the outcome of the committee at the end was to actually differ with the management recommendation to award to Gijima, but to rather award to T-Systems.
And can I then ask you to quickly turn to page 190, which is Annex 11.
Well, before that, other members of the committee, did they speak after Mr. Shane had spoken? Did
Not
they
that I remember.
speak to engage with his reasoning and his address vis-a-vis your address and the address of Mr. Thomas and the memo that had been put in recommending Gijima?
Chair, no, not to my recollection. Yeah. You know, the points that were thrown in by Mr. Gama, by Mr. Silinga, it was, you know, it was here and there to try to punctuate, but no reaction to what Mr. Shane was saying.
So, after Mr. Shane had spoken, did they just make a decision? Did they have to vote or anything? How was the decision arrived at? Or if you were still present at
Chair,
the
I
meeting?
think once we were done, yes, they agreed that they will go with T-Systems, but how the resolution was put together, I was not there.
But as I understand the position, and I just want you to say something about this,
Yes, Chair.
there was nothing before the committee in terms of any documentation, as far as you know, that supported that the award be granted to T-Systems. There was only a memo that supported that the tender be awarded to Gijima.
Chair, yes, there was only a memo that supported that the tender be awarded to Gijima.
And in terms of, until Mr. Thomas spoke, nobody had spoken against the recommendation that the tender be awarded to Gijima. There had been questions, but like from Ms. Mabaso, but really nobody had spoken against the recommendation that management had made.
No, Chair.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. At page 190 of the bundle.
I'm sorry, let me ask this. Now, you had, from the first time you started dealing with this matter, you had reservations about the tender being awarded to T-Systems. Your reservations had, as time went on, been kind of vindicated, and ultimately one recommendation was made. Out of what Mr. Shane said, and I couldn't follow everything,
Yes.
I thought the sound wasn't good, I couldn't follow everything.
Yes.
Out of what he said, did he engage with the reasons that in regard to risks that you had put forward in any meaningful way?
No, Chair. I think you might not have picked it up quite clearly, but he spoke to, for example, the newspapers and the headlines, how we would be exposing Transnet, because Gijima, can you imagine if people cannot send email? Now, all those things, email will be one of the predetermined criteria in terms of the technical capability of Gijima. It's a critical service, but it's a basic service. So all those risks that he actually tried to elevate out of his motivation, they were actually part of the evaluation that was done. So I couldn't find anything except for the newspapers, which I wasn't even aware of what was happening with the newspapers, but you know, Transnet is a huge organization. You'll always find yourself in the newspapers. For good or for bad, you'll find yourself in the newspapers. So I couldn't pick anything that he was particularly raising that I thought would qualify to be an objective criteria that we could have had an oversight of.
Yes.
So
yes.
I just, that's why at the end I just felt he just spoke and spoke,
Yeah.
and I couldn't pick up anything that he was really saying, except that he
Yes.
would want to actually just say we will not go with the management recommendation. Yeah.
When they came back into the meeting, that is he, Mr. Gama, and there was a third member of the committee, when they came back into the meeting after having taken quite long to to come back during the break. Did they tell the meeting why they'd taken so long and what was the issue? They kept you waiting, you people waiting for a long time.
Chair, they kept us waiting for a long time. But when Mr. Shane opened the meeting by saying, we are now getting to one of the most difficult discussions, I had a sense that they could have grappled with it. Maybe they
Yes.
were actually looking at it to say, this is so complex, and how do we actually deal with it? But it was just my inference now.
But there couldn't have been a committee because you said one of the members was waiting for them with you.
Mr. Nagdi was actually
Yes.
in the board meeting
And
with
he
us.
was a member of the committee.
He was a member of the ADC committee.
So some members of the committee, 3 members were away for quite some time. You don't know exactly what they discussed, but you are saying that the way, the manner in which Mr. Shane started the meeting in regard to this issue suggested to you that maybe that's what they may have been discussing, but
Yes, Chair, because
Yeah.
of the complexity that they were seeing.
okay, all right.
I think, though, Chair, even if I can mention, Mr. Nagdi, who remained behind, was actually the overseer of IT because of his background. So one would
Yes.
have expected him to be very vocal about this
Yes.
particular tender
Yes.
and how we are going to mitigate. But
Yes.
I do recall that he did make a comment to say the biggest fear factor of this tender is the migration of data, which is true. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
Just how you migrate the data and make sure that the completeness of that migration is actually
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
So I did, yeah, he did make a small comment, but I would have expected him to actually be the
much
one who
more
was very vocal
active. Yeah.
about this tender.
Okay, thank you.
At page 190 of the bundle, appears a memorandum, and its purpose is recorded in paragraph 1 to request the Board of Directors to A, approve the award of a contract to T-Systems South Africa, Pty Ltd, for a period of 5 years with an option to extend for a further period of 2 years, and B, grant authority to the GCE to sign the letter of intent to the preferred bidder, T-Systems, letters of regret, LOR, to the unsuccessful bidders, the contract and all relevant documentation, including any subsequent contract amendments. If you turn to page 201, paragraph 51 aligns with the purpose, and it appears to be signed by Mr. Gary Peter as the Group Chief Financial Officer on the 14th of the 2nd, 2017, and recommended by Siyabonga Gama, the Group Chief Executive, on the 15th of February 2017. Is that correct?
Well, it is correct.
Okay. And so it was not signed by the chairperson of the committee?
Chair, it was not signed by the chairperson of the ADC committee. One would have expected that at this stage, because as management we actually make submissions to the ADC subcommittee, and the chairman of that subcommittee takes ownership now of the decisions of that to the board. This one was actually done by Mr. Gary Peter and Mr. Gama, but perhaps because they were both directors of Transnet. But to me, it didn't actually look right when I saw it.
Because what should have gone
To the main board,
to the main board should come from the committee.
from the committee itself, and it should be
Yes.
signed off by the chairman
By
of
the
that
chairperson,
subcommittee.
At page 15, paragraph 38, you make...
Well, before that, this gives the impression that, I'm going back to page 190, this gives the impression that it's It's a memo coming from just the executives and going straight to
The main
to
board.
the board, is that right?
Yes, Chair, that is what it's. the
Which
impression
is
it's
not
giving.
correct.
Which is not correct.
Yes. Now, Mr. Gama was now signing a memo saying, recommending T-Systems, whereas previously had signed a memo recommending
Kichima.
Gijima.
Yes.
You have read this memo. You have read this memo.
Yes, Chair.
How does it deal with the motivation that the other memo that he signed had put forward for recommending Gijima? Just briefly, what are you able to highlight? Does it engage with the reasons? In other words, or does it seem to be just a standalone, distinct, separate, and without the background of the other memo?
So, Chair, if you look at that memo and you go to 199, it highlights a whole lot of reasons that were raised by the ADC, and where it was one talking to the risk that the ADC was actually seeing with this particular recommendation, and how Gijima was the third-ranked bidder, how Gijima couldn't have, for example, they would say the pricing provided was after they had access to specific details. So it explained all those things that some of them I can't remember hearing in the board, but I think the memo was just summarizing the views that the board was seeing.
And those views were views that had been contained in Mr. Shane's address at the meeting?
Some of them, Chair.
But some of them
were
new, were not there necessarily?
Not necessarily, really.
Yeah. Okay, all right, thank you.
Ms. Musidi, did Mr. Gama send you any communication during that meeting?
Or in the ADC?
Yes.
Yes, but I didn't see it when I was in the ADC. I saw it after I left, but I realized that he had sent me a WhatsApp to say, stop fighting, you can see what the board would like to have. But I only saw it after, so I couldn't have reacted in time to it.
Okay.
What did you make of that message coming from
my boss?
From your boss?
I felt disappointed. Because, Chair, I think after this particular engagement with the board, I should say my energy waned. And also, I never actually asked him why he sent me the WhatsApp, because I think he wanted me, I should have stopped earlier in the discussions in the board if I had seen his WhatsApp. But I'm not in the habit of actually checking WhatsApp much when I'm in a meeting that is that difficult, so I didn't see it. But I was feeling disappointed because I thought we have bought into what we needed to do as management, and we're going to help each other to explain to the board the whole process that we have undertaken, how we are going to mitigate the risks, and how we will continuously keep the board abreast, and they should actually trust us. I was expecting that. So when I saw the WhatsApp after, I felt a little bit discouraged in terms of what we needed to do.
There may be two or more ways of understanding that message. One of them might be that he was saying, look, no matter what you say, it's quite clear which way this board is going. You are wasting your time, just save your breath, yeah. Without necessarily saying the board was right.
Yes.
That's one way of looking at it. It may be, maybe another way might be that he didn't want you at this stage to oppose the board when the board wanted things in a certain way. And therefore, the board is right. Maybe that might be another way. There might be another interpretation. Which interpretation did you attach to it?
Chair, I actually took the latter.
Yes.
As my first reaction.
That he didn't want you to oppose the board.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not necessarily that he was saying, look, I don't agree with them, but stop
Yes.
fighting.
Yes.
Okay.
That was the latter is the one that came first to my mind.
Yeah, okay.
Is it correct that following this meeting, everything went, as you state in paragraph 41, a dark hole?
Yes, Chair, I think, what paragraph is that?
Paragraph 41 on page 16.
Yeah, because once the ADC had recommended to the main board, and the main board had taken the resolution to award to T-Systems, I never knew what to do next. I kept on requesting procurement to guide us in the process. How far are we? When do we start the negotiations? It was all quiet. I wasn't even aware that there was an objection that was registered by Gijima.
I'm sorry, Ms. Mosedi. Are you on her statement?
Yes, Chair, it's
What about?
page 16, paragraph 41.
Okay, thank you. You may proceed.
So, Chair, yes, I just, Ms. September was asking me a dark hole, and I was saying it was a dark hole because I just never knew where the process was. As a business owner, I did expect to be copied, for example, when the letter of award was sent out. I owned the requirements. I had to know what we were communicating to T-Systems. I didn't know. And even when there was an objection, I didn't know. I kept on inquiring, when do we start? In fact, the former chief executive of T-Systems actually called me to say, Makan, when do we start negotiations? I said, no, I'm waiting for my procurement people to tell me now they are done with their process. They will actually give me the go-ahead to start engaging with you. But Chair, that never actually happened. Yeah, so I started hearing post the events that Gijima objected and so on and so on. So I wasn't quite close to that process at all.
Chair, I can't help but notice the time, and I'm just guided.
How much more time do you think we need to finish?
Probably 20 minutes.
Hmm?
Probably 15, 20 minutes.
Yeah, let's try and finish.
Okay.
Is that still fine with you, Ms. Mosedi?
Chair, yes, because I think the remainder of my story really is very, very short.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Is it correct then, Ms. Mosidi, that you were subsequently involved and requested to engage in settlement negotiations?
Yes, Chair. So in an attempt to buffer Transnet, because when the legal wrangle started between T-Systems and Gijima, Transnet is the one that actually suffered.
Why do you leave out Transnet? They were just as much of the...
Yeah, I just thought they were the beneficiary of the consequences. Yeah. So,
Okay, right, yes.
So when they were actually fighting and having a tug of war, it was Transnet that was actually suffering because we couldn't do anything. At the same time, Chair, Treasury was saying we will not give you another extension. And we needed the extension because even if we were going to transition, we still needed T-Systems to be part of that process.
And if I can interrupt you there,
Yeah.
having mentioned National Treasury, is it also correct that at paragraph 44.4 of your statement, National Treasury gave particular direction to Transnet in relation to the award to T-Systems?
Yes. So for me, even that information I got second-hand, but yes, I was told that National Treasury has given us directive to actually rescind the award to Gijima, to T-Systems and award to Gijima.
And was the decision in fact rescinded?
I understand that on the in September sometime, the board took a decision to rescind the award.
And if
Was
one-
that still the same board?
It was still the previous board, yes, not the current board.
Okay.
And if one then turns to page 203, and there appears minutes of the special Board of Directors meeting held on the 27th of September 2017. And if you then turn to page 207, the resolution of the board to rescind the award is documented under paragraph 4.1.13.
I thought you said page 203.
207.
203 is in fact the first page to the minute of the special board meeting that was held, and the actual resolution of the board to rescind reflects on page 207. Under paragraph 4.1.13.
Yes.
Can I then take you back to just give an overview of...
Before taking her back, I asked earlier on, Ms. Mosidi, whether it was the same board, and you said yes, but I don't see Mr. Shane in the list of members on page 203. Am I missing something, or he might have not been there?
Chair, whilst I will not have the exact dates, I remember that Mr. Shane subsequently resigned from the Board of Transnet before we concluded this process.
Before this meeting?
Possibly before this meeting. And I think that will explain why he was not here.
Oh.
Yeah.
It's
Because I see that he's not even mentioned under apologies. So.
yes. Well, it just seems strange. Before he spoke at the other meeting, nobody seemed to be against your recommendation that Kichima should be given the tender. After he spoke,
Everybody went.
the members of the committee all agreed with him.
Yes.
After he spoke against it. And then when he is not there, then they change the decision. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Can I then take you back and just ask you to explain the engagement in the settlement negotiations as you've earlier alluded to, in specific regard to the quantum or the value of settlement negotiations that were being discussed?
So, Chair, in an attempt to broker this impasse, because we couldn't do anything, and we spent our time and resources trying to resolve the legal wrangles, Mr. Gama directed me to negotiate a settlement to see if a settlement out of court will actually accelerate the process of clearing the impasse and going on with our business. And in that meeting, he did call me together with Mr. Slinga, but I'm the one who actually carried out the discussions and the negotiations. I met with both T-Systems and Kichima. Yes, it was not an easy discussion moving from one to the other. It was like we're going to make a breakthrough, and then T-Systems will say, no, we cannot accept this or we cannot accept that. But also, I think what started being of a concern to me is how it was beginning to be construed to be somebody soliciting a bribe or something that is not correct. And whilst T-Systems did indicate informally to say they will settle for about 75 million, we were not actually prepared to go to give them anything more than 20 million rand, which was a far cry from where they were in terms of their aspirations. So at the end, when we have gone up and down, I then wrote a final letter to say the offer is off the table, formally and finally, and we'll go back to the process of trying to hackle this out in court. So that process was actually concluded in that fashion where everything was off the table, no money was paid to anybody. But the idea really was to say, because we'll always need T-systems to transition, let's give them an incentive to transition quickly, because they can actually frustrate the process so much because they are the current incumbent. They can actually stay there for the next 2 years trying to transition. And I'm not saying they're like that, but that's what will happen because we're really in their mercy. So it made sense when Mr. Gaba said it will be a performance bonus of 20 million rand for them to transition quickly to Gijima so that we get on with our business. But that whole proposition was then taken off the table formally.
Just in relation to your engagements, there was one particular engagement that you had with Gijima on page 18, paragraph 51 of your statement, which talks to a private meeting that was had. Can you just briefly explain the details of this meeting, please?
So, Chair, in that process, when we were negotiating and trying to clear the impasse, but when Gijima was also trying to make sure that they get on board because they were realizing that they were the recommended party and they couldn't wait to take over. There was a day that a meeting was scheduled, and it just had an address in my calendar, and so I just followed it in my car. But I then ended up at Mr. Gumede's house, which is somewhere in Saxon World. So I was there already. I entered, and yes, we had our meeting there, and in the meeting, it was Mr. Gumede, it was Mr. Samuel, who was the CEO of Gijima, it was Mr. Ngumalo, who was the COO of Gijima. And the meeting, whilst it was really just talking about their readiness to actually transition and take over the work, I think I was very uncomfortable that it was in somebody's house. I wish I had known.
In whose house was it?
It was in Mr. Robert Gumede's house.
Mr. Gumede's house?
Yes, who is the chairman of Gijima.
Yes.
So I felt very uncomfortable.
Yes, and who had called the meeting?
It was called by Mr. Ngumalo, who was the COO of Gijima.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why did you agree to go to Mr.
I
Gumede's house?
I actually thought it was one of their offices until I
Yes.
followed the GPS
Yes.
and I started
Yes.
realizing I'm in a residential area. By then
Yeah.
it was too late, they were waiting for me.
Okay.
Yeah. So but I did express my displeasure to Mr. Ngumalo, and I sent him a WhatsApp and I said, Mapuma Butuak, I really prefer office meetings, any office, yours or mine, but even for next time, let's not do it this way. I just wanted to clarify my position in terms of something.
Yes.
The new board then comes on board during May of 2018. Is that correct?
Yes.
What was then the engagement with the new board in respect of this particular tender?
Yeah, so we had several meetings with the board. In fact, when the new board came, I was almost the first executive to start engaging with them in detail because of not only this tender, but other IT tenders as well. And I remember we just had several meetings where we were presenting, because now we were in a corner chair. Treasury was saying they're not going to give us further extension. We didn't have anyone to award to. We had to go to the court. The court process was going to take forever. We were going to miss the deadline with National Treasury. So we were actually going to start expending unauthorized. So we had to create that visibility for the board. So the new board engaged, and they really tried to understand where we were coming from. We presented the two options, the options that we had, and we even started playing with the option of transitioning to ourselves as Transnet. And whilst it was a really brilliant idea to transition to Transnet, Transnet was far from ready. It had never insourced these services. When you look at the capabilities and the skills that were required, there was no way in which we were going to be able to do this. So it became the one with the highest risk. And so we then summarized and showed to the board to say, the only way out for us, and we think that if we start transitioning to Gijima, Treasury will understand that we need the time to transition and we won't get into a space where we go unauthorized. So we actually presented and showed them that Gijima was the least risk. The Gijima option was the least risk option in terms of where we were. And I think they started understanding that, except that for their own conviction and assurance, they needed an independent person to actually look at this whole process in terms of how we were thinking about it. And I think, Chair, at that time, when you want an independent reviewer, it must be another procurement process. And Chair, it was at that point that I actually tendered my resignation.
Were you feeling that this thing was taking too long, or what? Or it was just coincidental?
Chair, there were a number of things which were at play.
Yes, okay.
I think the first one, I really had an opportunity I couldn't say no to,
Okay.
in terms of the job that I'm sitting in. Secondly, I think I started realizing long in 2017 when the board changed the whole award, and I couldn't understand why. I realized this was going to be an uphill because I wasn't feeling like I was getting value from the board in terms of their input to us, but also I was feeling like they were frustrating the process. It's very difficult to work when you're not convinced that this is when you know that this is wrong and you want to work at it. Somehow it doesn't actually augur well, even for the teams that you lead. So I felt like something must change. It's a pity the new board came very late in the process, but my mind was actually unlocked,
Was made up,
dislodged. I wanted to look
Yeah.
at something else, and I wanted to give the new board some space for them to do their own assessment and interrogation.
Okay.
Chair, and then lastly, it's common cause that the tender was in fact set aside on the 12th of December last year, and it is attached to the statement from pages 214
I think I've seen the judgment, even the judgment.
to 234. And in particular, I just wanted to highlight paragraph 37, 38, and 39 of the judgment. Can I just be given a second of indulgence?
Yeah.
Chair, I have no further questions for this witness.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mosi. We appreciate that you came to give evidence. Thank you very much. You are excused.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Who is leading evidence tomorrow? Do you remember?
I understand it to be Ms. Refilwe Molefe.
Okay, we'll start at 10. Then we'll adjourn for the proceedings for the day, and tomorrow we'll start at 10. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.
No, seriously, you don't understand. I've only, if I had somebody sit by me once before.